kicking it off today, we're going to be talking with Randy Harris, a volunteer at the Museum of Making Music, as well as a luthier. And Mr. Bill is going to guide our session today with Randy. They're compatriots and both guitarists and guitar builders. Well, Bill, you're not a guitar builder, but you are a guitarist. You benefit from the fruits of Randy's labor. So I will let
superb guitar player.
There you go. I'll let you guys have at it. Have a great show, and I will be here to pass any questions along from our live audience. Hopefully our live audience will grow despite our little hiccup with starting this morning, and I hope everybody has a good morning as we learn about guitar building.
Yay. Thank you, BJ. What a great introduction. And welcome, Randy. BJ said some of the things I was going to say. Randy is certainly an amazing volunteer at the Museum of Making Music. Randy, you've been with us about a year, maybe a year and a half?
Almost 2 years, Bill.
Wow, time flies.
Yeah,
guitars, right?
Right.
And I was sitting at my desk one day and Randy walked in with a guitar case, very nice looking case. I figured he was going to show me one of the guitars he owns. And he opened the case and said, take a look. This is one of the guitars I built. And I said, wow, A, it was beautiful. B, the tone was stunning. And I mean, that's an understatement, both of those comments. I pulled the guitar out. Well, first I asked permission, right? I think, Randy, took the guitar out of the case and played it. And it sang to me right off the bat. So Randy is, in fact, what you call a luthier. And if anybody is not sure what that term means, the definition is a maker of stringed instruments such as violins and guitars. So Randy, I know you've got a great PowerPoint presentation to show us your journey as a luthier. So how about if you take it away, give us a little intro to the PowerPoint, and I'll let you run with it.
Sure, Bill. Thanks. I appreciate that. Nice intro. I appreciate your comments about my guitar as well. That was a guitar that I had actually sold a number of years ago, 20 years ago, actually. I sold it to a fellow who was a player in Florida, and he was a fingerstyle player. He had very specific needs. At the time, I didn't know much about building. I built to what I thought his needs would be. And as it turns out, the neck that I had built for him on this particular instrument did not suit his hand. And he asked me if I would take it back and put a new neck on it. So I said, sure, I'll be happy to do that. So he sent it back, and darn it, I fell in love with the guitar, and I wouldn't send it back to him. So I bought it back. I built a neck for my hand, and to this day, it's back here. I'll show it to you guys a little bit later. But this is the instrument that I built for this wonderful player on the other side of the country. And now it's been mine for the last 19 or 20 years. So yeah, so before I start, I want to apologize for this picture. The lighting in my office here isn't terrific. And try to ignore my split lip. I have a split lip. I've had it for a couple of weeks. It's a result of doing so much walking outdoors. It's the sunshine drying out my lips. They've split, and it's not a pleasant thing to look at. So don't look at my lips, just look at my presentation.
Perfect.
Okay, so a disclaimer, although I was, and I still consider myself a luthier, I'm not a working guitar builder any longer. Due to allergies related to wood dust and volatile chemicals that are contained within finishing products, I decided to give up the pursuit of guitar building for a number of years. I actually was going to start building again last year, and 2 years ago, and lo and behold, my wife and I decided to move. We moved from Northern California to Southern California to beautiful Carlsbad, California, home of the Museum of Making Music, by the way. And when we moved here, before we moved, I sold all of my heavy equipment. So all of my power tools are gone except for my hand tools and the small power tools. And I have not built out a shop yet. I'm working out of my garage, just doing a little work on my own personal guitars, but I'm not at the moment a working luthier.
Okay.
So,
Randy, can I just interrupt with one quick question for you?
Sure.
when you started talking about this guitar that you built for the gentleman on the other
Yes.
side of the country, he wanted a different neck on it.
Yeah.
That brings up a point that maybe a lot of people might not be aware of. You look at an acoustic guitar and it looks like one contiguous unit.
Right.
But you say you can actually take the neck off of an acoustic guitar.
That's right.
With another one, a different size, different style.
If you're working with a hand builder as opposed to a factory builder, you're working on a very personal level. Most hand builders will do their very best to determine the specifications of the neck that the player is looking for. If somebody can afford to buy a hand-built instrument, afford financially and the time it takes to build one, they generally have very specific needs and desires, and they tend to be accomplished musicians. The difference of even a 1/16 of an inch in the overall diameter of the neck or the neck shape can determine greatly whether the guitar will play well for a player. Because Michael, the fellow that bought this particular instrument, he had small hands, and I did ask him to take some templates of an instrument that he already had at home. I tried to use the templates that he gave me, but I got the overall dimension just a little bit off. And yeah, I could have carved it down and given it back to him, but doggone it, I fell in love with the guitar and I just didn't want to send it back. But yes, if you're working with a hand builder, very often they'll pull a neck and build a new one, or they'll make adjustments to it. It is not a difficult thing. I use what are called bolt-on necks as opposed to a dovetail construction like Martin guitar, or the hybrid type of bolt-on neck that a Taylor guitar uses. Hand builders use all different methods of attaching their necks. I use bolt-on because that's how I learned.
Okay, all right. And just to make sure everybody's clear, when you say a hand builder versus a factory built guitar that's basically on an assembly line, like the old Henry Ford assembly line,
That's right.
are literally building that guitar from raw wood up to the finished product by yourself, by hand.
That's right. Everything from the specifications of the guitar itself in terms of its size. Some players, for instance, don't like dimensionally thick instruments. They like them to be closer into their bodies. So an instrument might be for a custom builder, a hand builder. That's not a big deal. It's just a matter of reworking the geometry of the instrument. For a factory, it would be darn near impossible to do that unless you're working with what they call the custom shop. Martin Guitar Company, for instance, has a custom shop where you can specify almost every aspect of the instrument. Same thing with Taylor guitars, not so much with Gibson, although they do have a custom shop. It's not as user-friendly. But when you're dealing with a hand builder, you can vary you can vary the dimensions of the instrument a great deal, and that requires a lot of geometry. It requires a great deal of knowledge of the bracing of the tops themselves, because obviously, if an instrument is non-standard, if it's bigger than it should be, the bracing has to be appropriately thicker and stronger, and vice versa. If it's a smaller instrument, you don't want an overbraced small guitar.
So for instance, a dreadnought guitar, the bracing would be larger and thicker than, say, a parlor guitar.
Generally, yes, although there are a lot of builders that use what's called scalloped bracing, where they selectively carve out pieces of the braces to lighten up the top, so that will vibrate at different parts of the instrument. And so they are lightly braced dreadnoughts. For instance, most of the Martin HD 28s, for instance, or an HD 42 or 45, those are all scalloped braced guitars, as opposed to straight braces that are parabolic shaped braces that just go straight across on the underside. When I go through my presentation here, I'll show you what a heavily scalloped, I only use scalloped bracing. I learned from a fellow who had really dialed in his bracing architecture, and I adopted a lot of his theories.
Wow. So I want to get to your presentation, but talking to you, it just gets all these questions popping out of my head.
Yeah, that's fine. Whatever you want to do.
Well, just one more thing I want to point out. Any educators who are watching this presentation right now, I think you realize listening to Randy talk, building a guitar, it absolutely uses science, technology, engineering, arts, and math, uses the STEAM principles. Just talking about the design, the 1/16 of an inch makes all the difference in the world, bracing sizes, so on and so forth. But yeah, let's go ahead and get to your PowerPoint presentation, because I certainly want to see.
That would be fine. I would agree with you that there's a lot of devil in the details with guitar building. There are a minimum of 200 different procedures to hand build an acoustic guitar, and every one of them are critical. So there's no substitute for time. When you're building a guitar by hand, it can take as long as 6 months to build one.
Wow.
So if we go through, first of all, let me just talk a little bit about the introduction to Lutherie, what it is. Now, for those of you who are watching me on the screen, you might see me looking down every once in a while. I apologize for that. I'm reading off of a script that I originally wrote for the Museum of Making Music, volunteers and staff. Hard to believe, but it was almost a year ago. I guess it was about 8 months ago.
Right.
And why reinvent the wheel? I got all of these notes that I wrote to myself. So from time to time, if I'm staring down, I'm not ignoring you guys. I just want to be sure I get you the information that you would like. So first of all, the introduction to Lutherie. Well, what is it? This comes from the word Luthier, which means the craft of making stringed instruments. Bill already mentioned that. Stringed instruments are either plucked or they're bowed. If they're bowed, they look like a violin or a cello. If they're plucked, they look like a guitar or a lute or any number of other instruments. There's some controversy about other solid wood instruments that use soundboards and strings, such as pianos. Well, technically, piano makers are not luthiers, but pretty much all of the processes that go into the building of a piano go into the building of a guitar. They're just shaped differently. Of course, a piano is struck or hammered. It is not plucked and it isn't bowed. But interestingly enough, they rely very heavily on soundboards, as do all stringed instruments. So in terms of the history of the guitar, they go back a very, very long way. In the upper left-hand corner of this image, you'll see a lute. That's a Baroque instrument that goes back into, well, the 13th century, perhaps even a little bit farther back than that. It's an instrument that was played all throughout Western Europe, but primarily in Italy. And this lute instrument and something like it was eventually distributed and played all throughout Europe. Luthier comes from the word lute. And so that instrument there that you're looking at, that particular one has 12 strings. That instrument is a direct descendant of a guitar. The one in the center, of course, is a harp, beautiful harp. I believe that's a Celtic harp. On the far right, Ravi Shankar made that instrument rather famous, some 45 years ago. Gosh, what is that called? It's called a sitar. That's correct. On the bottom left is a cello. In the center, of course, is a violin. And on the right is a mandolin. These are all instruments that are built by luthiers.
Let me, while you're changing slides, just point out to our Beatles fans, we all became very, very familiar with the sitar through George Harrison's influence in bringing Ravi Shankar really to the front and center stage with their fans.
Right. Those of us of a certain age remember the 60s and all of the sessions that the Beatles and many of the other famous bands of the era were involved with the Maharishi Mahesh Yogi back when it was in vogue to be deeply involved in Indian mystic music. And you're right, the sitar was definitely part of that program. So it's hard to report the history of Lutherie without a little bit of a nod to the ages and to the famous folks. What you're looking at here, this is the Sabionari. This is an instrument that was built by Antonio Stradivari. Yes, Stradivarius built guitars. He didn't just build cellos and violins. He had a very large workshop, and that workshop was overseen by patrons. Patrons would pay in this particular case, Antonio Stradivari, to produce instruments for the patrons and the friends and orchestras that they supplied instruments to. And it enabled these great builders of instruments, not just Stradivari. There were many others, particularly in Cremona, which was in Italy. The town of Cremona is kind of famous for its stringed bowed instruments. But Antonio Stradivari also built guitars. And this is the last working Antonio Stradivari guitar that is known. This one is still taken out and played in concert, and it's called the Sabionari.
Where is it held?
It's in Europe someplace. It's in Europe someplace. But I couldn't tell you exactly where it's located.
Now, if I'm seeing right, Randy, it looks like this guitar also has double course strings, kind of like a mandolin.
It looks that way, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does.
Yeah, that's what it looks like. It looks like a mandolin double course, yeah.
So that everybody knows what we mean by double course, if you look at each string going from the bridge up to the nut and to the tuning mechanism, there's two strings side by side, and they would be, if it's like a mandolin, they would be tuned in unison. And that allows the instrument to have a little bit more projection, a little bit more tone.
Right. Oftentimes they would be tuned, at least the lower three courses would be tuned in octaves. And I honestly don't know if this particular one is tuned in octaves. So in other words, the low E string might be, well, first of all, these are 5 courses, not 6. So it probably, you're right, Bill, this is probably more akin to a mandolin than a guitar.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah. Well, you know, Stradivarius built 1,000 guitars. His workshop built 1,000 guitars, and this is the only one left that's playable, that is used in concert. I'm sure there are others around. But it's interesting to think that not only are Stradivarius violins and cellos extraordinarily valuable and valued, this instrument is as well.
No doubt.
So instruments were being produced throughout Europe. The Germanic countries produced fabulous stringed and bowed instruments as well. The piano, which was invented in Italy in around 1700, was an offshoot of the harpsichord. And although originally believed to be an Italian invention, it was refined and used extensively in Germanic Europe. So pianos, harpsichords, guitars, lutes, harps, cellos, violas were all being made and used throughout the 17th century, which was considered the golden era in European Lutherie. You know, perhaps one of the reasons that Lutherie was such a strong appeal to me, it always appealed to me, is that the design, the construction, and generally the sound of these instruments, it hasn't changed much in 400 years. When I build an acoustic guitar using hand saws, knives, chisels, and planes, I'm drawing a direct connection, a lineage, if you will, to those great makers of centuries past. Metallurgy is advanced leaps and bounds, which has improved the strings and the tuners and made some things possible that weren't even dreamt of hundreds of years ago. But yet here we are celebrating the Lutherie craft at the museum, the old and the new.
Nice.
So that's a little bit of a brief history of Lutherie. 25%, I'm guessing, 25% of the instruments at the Museum of Making Music are probably stringed instruments made by luthiers, which had a great appeal to me when I decided that I wanted to work there as a volunteer. And certainly there are many other kinds of marvelous instruments at the museum, but I'm always astonished when I look at all these various instruments, historic instruments from iconic companies. that we have at the museum. And I hope that anybody who's plugged in here today takes the time to come to the museum and revel in the beauty of them, because they really, truly are.
And it's such a beautiful art form.
Spectacular. You know, it's building musical instruments, guitars or any other musical instrument is really, it's one of the things that really attracted me in the beginning was that it's left brain, but it's also strongly right brain. You can use your left brain for the artistry of the instrument, and you have to use the right brain for the constant, I believe it's left and right, for the geometry and the intellectual aspects of building them. The two demand pretty strong left and right brain activity. Sometimes you're good at one or the other, and sometimes you're just mediocre at both, whatever. You do need them both to make it work. So how am I doing on time, Bill? Can I keep going?
You know, I'm so enthralled, I'm not really paying attention. We started about 10:30. We're at about 10 to 11.
Okay.
So give me 10, 15 more minutes. But yeah,
Sure.
Let's kind of move into some photos of you actually in action building guitars.
Sure. So let me preface that. Let me just go explain to you how I came about building acoustic guitars, because I said earlier, you know, I'm not building now, and I never really did it as anything other than, and it's sort of an advanced hobby. I first learned to play the acoustic guitar when I was very young, and I never was particularly good at it, but I hung in there and I played and played and played. Eventually, other interests took me away from the guitar in my, let's say in my 30s and 40s. And then I picked it up again. And when I did, well, I was fortunate enough to hook into very early days of social media. The social media on the internet in those days, they have what was called Usenet groups. And long before Facebook and Twitter and all the rest, Usenet groups were pretty much the way that people who had similar interests would hook up together. And I hooked up with a group of guitar enthusiasts, guitar players and builders. Builders looking for feedback from players, players looking for opportunities to meet builders and learn more about the instruments themselves. This was dating back to about 1992, 1993. If you remember, in 1992 and 1993, there weren't a lot of ways to connect around the world, but one of them was through this organization called Rec Music Makers Guitar Acoustic, RMMGA. It was a very early social media group that I hooked up to early, and I met some of the world's greatest guitar players online. Never saw a picture of them, never saw them face to face like we are today, but I spent an enormous amount of time just talking to them and learning from them, and we became close friends. Some of them I was fortunate enough to live in the same community with in Northern California. And as my journey through guitar building progressed, I was able to take that one step farther, and actually a couple of them mentored me, which was an extraordinary opportunity. Can't do that much today, but back then I was able to, and I was able to learn from some of the best. The way I began this in 1998, I took a 2-week intensive guitar course with a fellow named William Cumpiano. William Cumpiano wrote this book down at the very bottom. I should have got, I don't know if I can go backwards, so I don't want to go back on my little presentation here. But as you can see, there were a lot of different kinds of books that were available back in the 90s. But the book that was really considered the Bible for acoustic guitar builders was written by this fellow here. His name is Bill Cumpiano. He lives in Northampton, Massachusetts. And on a lark, I contacted him and asked him if I could spend 2 weeks with him, building acoustic guitars side by side with him, and learn his techniques. Bill was a hand builder in what they call the Spanish style. You'll notice that Bill is working on an instrument on a flat piece of wood that is guitar shaped, sticking out of his bench there. That is called a platen, P-L-A-T-E-N, and he is building from the ground up. So he's not using forms. He's not using any kind of jigs or fixtures at this point. He's just using the same tools that you could have used 200 years ago.
Wow.
And so when I learned from Bill, I learned how to build guitars old school, totally old school. He had some power tools, but you know, that was just my choice to do that. I didn't have to. There were plenty, even then, plenty of modern ways to build, but I wanted to learn the way he learned and the way he described in his book. I read his book, which is it's about 1.5 inches thick. I read this book twice before I went back to Northampton. It's a fabulous book. It's still in production, probably in like the 6th or 7th edition. It's been around a long, long time. And at any rate, Bill was a phenomenal teacher. And I did spend 2 weeks with him in Northampton, side by side. You'll notice there are 2 guitars on the bench. The guitar that you're looking at right there is Bill's, and he is showing me how to install binding on the guitar. Notice also that both guitars are identical. I spec'd this instrument out, and I told him exactly what I wanted. I knew what I wanted as a player. He prepared and purchased the wood in advance. We did all the cutting and all of the work on the instrument, but at least I had a pile of wood to start with. So he would build an instrument right next to mine. He would show me what he was doing, and then I would try to replicate his moves. If I did something wrong, we'd start over again, and that's how it worked. That's me, a much younger me. I had hair back then. I'm carving my neck right there using what's called a Spokeshave. It's a very old school tool, still being used. A lot of luthiers love them. It's a really cool little tool. And well, what can I say? There I am carving a neck. I'm going to show you that guitar in a moment. Here's Bill inspecting my neck and his neck side by side. You'll notice they're basically twins, these guitars. They were virtually identical.
So quick question, Ray. When
Yes.
you're carving a neck like that,
Yes.
that's something that would make me quite nervous. If you carve down a little too far, do you start
Yeah, throw it away and start over.
Okay, answer that one.
Yeah. Yeah, but it's not actually, neck carving is really, really fun, and it's not terribly difficult. You just have to be exacting. It's more important to get the shape of the neck right to your hand than it is worrying about, am I going to carve down too far? Mm-hmm. The only thing between you and the fretboard in a guitar neck is what they call a truss rod. Right. The truss rod is only sunk into the neck about 3/8 of an inch. So you're not going to hit that truss rod, but you do want some meat on the thing. And it is an art. I mean, you could very easily throw away 1 or 2 necks before you get it right. I had one of the world's greatest master luthiers standing next to me the whole time. So I was very fortunate that I didn't have to do that. So Martin Guitar Company, some 70 years ago, could have been a little longer, created a marvelous bridge called a pyramid bridge, and many of their early guitars had pyramid bridges. I specified that I wanted a pyramid bridge. Bill said, "Are you crazy? They're incredibly difficult to build. Are you sure that's what you want?" I said, yeah. I want a pyramid bridge. He said, "Okay, well, I'll show you how to make a pyramid bridge." Well, that is what he is doing right now. And I'm going to just show you this really quickly. I hope you can see this, the shape of the ends of the bridge. Do you see it? It looks like a little pyramid there.
Yep.
It's hard for me to know where that image is coming through or not.
You know what, Randy, when we wrap up the PowerPoint and you go back to your regular screen, then we'll get a better look at that guitar. So
yeah, okay, great. So anyways, he's showing me how to do a pyramid bridge. Well, here's a happy camper about day 13 into a very intense 2-week course. These courses started at 7:30 in the morning and didn't finish until 7 o'clock at night. So these were 12-hour days, 14 straight days. All we did was break for a half an hour for lunch.
Wow.
That was the only way we could get a guitar built from scratch. I forget how many hours that turned out to be, about 140 hours or something. Whatever it was, we managed. So here we are. We haven't put the backs on yet, but both guitars are sitting there waiting for the backs to. Both guitars are sitting in what they call Klemsia clamps. These are clamps that They're old German clamps, wooden clamps. I've got a whole bunch of them someplace around here. And the braces are being glued down onto the backs at the moment. In this method of building, the backs go on last.
Okay. Quick question, Randy, from one of our viewers.
Yeah.
Does the thickness of the neck affect the tone of the instrument?
It can. It depends on the type of wood that you're using, but generally on an acoustic guitar, not so much. What's most important is the connection between the neck and the body of the guitar. If you have a good solid connection between the body of the guitar and the neck, enough acoustic energy will transfer through the neck to make it one solid music making machine.
Beautiful.
Mm-hmm. So this is another in-process picture. This is where we have already bent our sides. And incidentally, here's how you bend sides. There's a lot of different ways to bend sides, and there are lots of machines you can use to bend sides. But you'll notice in this picture in the background, you'll see a machine very similar to this. This is nothing but a heating tube.
Okay.
Okay, do you see it back there? And it's attached to his bench. So what you do is you soak, once you've cut your sides to dimension, you soak them in water and for about a half an hour, 45 minutes, and then you take them out, and then you very carefully, you work them over and over the various bent portions of this tube here until you've come up with the appropriate dimensions. It's a time-consuming process, but in the end, when you've finished it, it feels really great. You've bent a guitar by hand as opposed to using a machine. Many builders today, even hand builders, use machines because they can build them quicker.
Okay.
This is what I was talking about. This is the work board, or the platen. This is made out of the 1/2 inch or 3/4 inch plywood. And this is how Bill builds his guitars. I found it to be too cumbersome in my own garage shop. I stopped using that style. I built my own platen later on. So this is what back braces look like. Pretty much all acoustic guitars have at least 3, usually 4 braces running across the back. It's not as critical for a back as it is for a top. They're primarily there to keep the guitar from folding in on itself. They're only secondarily involved in the making of music. If it's too heavily braced, the guitar will be heavy. If it's too heavily braced, it will keep the back from doing what you want it to do, because the entire instrument has to vibrate. But generally speaking, what you really want is just nice. What do you want? You want craftsmanship at this point.
Okay.
I'm gluing down my brace, my bridge here using hide glue. I'm sorry, I'm using tight bond here for that particular procedure. So we used hide glue and we used tight bond.
Okay.
And well, I don't know, this is a little bit out of sequence, but now the instrument has been built, and it's what's called in the white. In the white means that it has not been finished yet.
Okay.
It is built, but it still needs lacquer or shellac or whatever method you choose to use. And that was it, June 5th, 1998, that was number 1. And this is what sits inside that instrument now. When I went home, I was very enthusiastic. And although I had a full-time job, I really wanted to set up a home workshop. And you remember I talked about making my own kind of platen for building?
Yeah.
Well, if you look at the ceiling there, you'll see that there is something hanging that looks like a guitar, but it's got I don't know, 30 different cuts in it.
Yep.
And well, those are there so that I can build different size instruments off of that one platen. Using dowels, I can slide the dowels into the various portions, and it's marked off so that I can build anything from a 00 size guitar all the way up to a dreadnought.
Wow. Okay.
And that's more shots from my garage shop. I no longer have that beautiful bandsaw on the left. And most of these tools that you see here are gone. I did not I decided to use a more modern approach. This is what's called a fox bender. This is the thing in the foreground here on the left-hand side. I'm actually bending a set of wood right there using a fox bender. This was invented by a guy named Charles Fox. And it's been around for quite a long time, probably 25 years. And most hand builders use them today because they're just more accurate. You don't have to do so much touch-up work when you're using that kind of a bender. On the right-hand side is a joiner. And that's used to true up wood before you join two pieces of wood together.
All right, Randy, I have a couple other questions from viewers. This is kind of a two-parter.
Yeah.
The viewer says, Taylor guitar routes the edge of the top. Do you know if that makes a big difference in the sound? That's part one.
Yes, it does for them.
Okay.
What they are attempting to do is build the best possible guitar with the best possible tone in a factory setting where they're turning out 1,000 guitars, 500 guitars a day. And by routing around the edges, what they're doing is they're loosening up the top so that it has free-flowing vibrating movement. If you're hand building a guitar one at a time, you can do the same thing by tap toning or tone tapping the top by hand, tapping it, listening for vibrations, and then very slowly taking wood off of the braces in different places to get the same effect.
Got it. Wow, okay. And then part two of this question, and what is the best glue for guitar making?
There is no such thing. Hide glue is the traditional glue that luthiers have been using for hundreds of years. And lately there's a new kind of glue that is very old, but new to the guitar building world. They're using what they call fish glue, which is just another form of hide glue. And then there are products called Tight Bond, Tight Bond 1, not the ones that have all kinds of additives, additional additives to it, but the original Tight Bond. It's really hard to beat that.
Mm-hmm.
If you're mating two surfaces of wood and you're doing it properly with Tight Bond, your bond is stronger than the wood itself.
Okay.
I
was going to say Tight Bond is something you can find in your local art.
That's right. I stopped using all forms of hide glue and went strictly to Tight Bond because I've never had a joint fail, ever.
Right.
And now the reason that the hide glue is used by many hand builders in certain applications, not on the entire instrument, but in certain instruments, parts of the instrument. The reason they use it is that it is easy to separate. And if you need to take, for instance, if you want to take a neck out of a dovetail constructed guitar, it's easier and faster to take it out of an instrument that's been glued with hide glue.
Gotcha.
Ditto with fretboards. Many people like to use fretboards. I don't see any great advantage to hide glue particularly.
So I guess really the answer is sort of personal preference, right? Whatever the look.
Pretty much, yeah. It's fiddly. Hide glue is fiddly. You have to heat it up. Yeah, it has to be used within a certain period of time or it starts to fail. And you know, Tight Bond lasts forever. It's just great wood glue.
Well, Randy, we're at a little after 5 after 11.
Okay.
And I certainly want people to get a good look at the guitar you have sitting there behind you, in particular that Pyramid Bridge. Mm-hmm. Let's see, one more question. Guest is asking about the binding process. Can you explain the process of binding?
Sure. So binding, it's easier just to show it, I think.
Okay. How close are we to the end of the PowerPoint? I don't want to cut that short, but if we can get a more full view of your guitar. That would be nice.
So this is just a tool that I built for myself to thickness wood. The thickness of wood is critically important, especially the tops.
All right.
This is my nephew. I built a guitar and had him help me build it. This is one in process. This is me. This is a guitar ready to be shipped out to a customer.
So beautiful.
This is Sapelli. That's Sapelli wood. It's a kind of mahogany, beautiful. This is a fellow named Harvey Leach. He's a brilliant inlay artist. A friend of mine did the headstock of this guitar that I built for this gal here. Happy lady. She's a singer-songwriter up in Sebastopol.
Nice.
And she's taking delivery of that guitar right now, 20 years ago. I had to spray my instruments with nitrocellulose lacquer, and I had to do it outdoors. Not a really smart thing to do. Here are two in-process instruments that were going at the same time. This is just an artsy-fartsy picture that I love. Here's my necks. Here are those pyramid bridges we were talking about.
Yeah.
So you see how at first they just look, interesting, but they're actually very difficult to carve. And neither one of those are perfect, to say the least. But hand carving a pyramid bridge versus letting a CNC computer-generated machine do it, well, I would rather do it with a chisel. This is what I wanted to show you guys, because I think it's important to know what actually is. This is the engine of your guitar, right here. Remember that what's making the noise is the top vibrating, and the looser the top, generally, as long as it's controlled, the better. So these mountains that you're looking at here, these are carved braces on this instrument, actually. And those braces are pretty much what all of my instruments look like underneath the top. A fellow named Lance McCollum, he died way too young, about 7 years ago. He was another builder, a great builder, world-class builder. He kind of popularized this radical bracing, and I adopted it because I just love the way his instruments sounded, and I was able to use it in my own instruments. Yeah. There's another one from 19, I can't read that. Looks like 01.
Yep.
Okay. That's what she looks like before the top goes down. And here we are gluing the top down with tape. And now this is a good shot of the platen. Remember I was telling you about the building platen. This is the building platen that I developed, and you'll notice that all of these are all handmade clamps that are spool clamps all the way around. It's holding the top down to the sides, and depending upon where those spool clamps are in those slots, it can be a large guitar or it can be a very small guitar.
Wow.
And these are just more in process. This is another one going out the door. Me with my stash and about 25 pounds additional on me. I built a guitar for my niece on her 18th birthday in 2004. And one of my favorite songs is written by a fellow named Don McLean called well, I don't know what it's called. I call it Starry Night, but I don't think that was actually the name of the tune. Vincent, I think the tune was Vincent.
I think you're right, yes.
Yeah, so I decided, I was inspired by that. Coco, my niece, is an opera singer. And I knew she would appreciate it, and she is a guitar player. Mm-hmm. So this was Starry Night. And you'll notice all of the little stars all over the headstock. The headstock logo at the top was my logo, Cooper Guitars, big C, okay. And that's what the rosette looked like. It was ebony with I don't know, 100 little stars in it.
That's beautiful. See what you're showing us right here, Randy, is such a great definition, description, however you want to say it, of the difference between being able to go to a luthier such as yourself and say, this is what I want my instrument to look like, because this is me.
It's much why people do that
ourselves. And what you've done for your niece there was create an instrument that really does express who she is. And
that's exactly right, Bill. That's exactly right. And this guitar that was made out of Hawaiian koa, and that's what you're looking at there. The back and sides are koa. Okay. And these are just more process pictures. I can just scooch right through these, and you'll see, my bracing is pretty consistent throughout all the instruments. Okay. And you get the idea.
It's one amazingly deep, detailed process that people such as yourself that can actually go down this road amaze me. Because
I was blessed. I was very lucky, Bill. I had a job. I was essentially my own boss. Mm-hmm. I could make my own time, and I had the resources that enabled me to go to the East Coast and learn to do this, right. And buy the supplies and buy the various tools necessary. Right. And not everybody is that lucky. But today many community colleges have Lutherie courses. Here in the North County, Palomar College and Mira Mesa College both have Lutherie courses. There's probably others as well. And you know, what was available to us 20 years ago is nothing compared to what's available today. Online alone, you can take online courses and build a guitar from scratch.
Yeah.
So it's pretty amazing. That's my brother's guitar. He turned 50. This was the second guitar I'd ever built. I built it. You know, it had a few warts, but he really appreciated it. That was built in '99. There it goes. Yeah, and that's it.
Let's bring you back up full screen, Randy, and then let's get back to the question from the viewer asking you to explain the binding process.
Okay, I'm not sure how to get back up to full speed.
I see you full screen now. So.
Oh, do you? Okay.
Back. Welcome back, Randy.
Hey. Thank you. So the binding process. The binding process is really no different than any of the other processes. This is the binding right here.
Yeah.
It goes all the way around the instrument on both top and on the bottom. This is made out of flamed maple.
And the binding, I'm assuming, is glued in again with your preferred.
The binding is glued in. You start first. You glue the top down to the body. Once the top has been glued down to the body and it's a good solid piece, it doesn't have the neck on it. It's just the body. You use a router. I use what's called a laminate trimmer, which is just a smaller. You don't need a 1.5 horsepower router to do this work. So a laminate trimmer, you can use it in your hand. You have better control over it, and you route all the way around the depth and the height, all the way around the instrument body, and then you can purchase binding material from any number of Lutherie supply outfits, or if you have the equipment, you can make your own. I don't make my own because it would cost me more to do that than to buy it already made. And this way I can have binding made out of a dozen different kinds of wood. I really like koa and I really like flamed maple because they're hard. I mean, remember why the binding is there. The binding is there to protect the instrument. That's really, it's cosmetic, but that's really what it is. It's just there to keep the instrument from self-destructing when you bang it into a music stand or a mic. So, but it's cosmetically, it looks beautiful. So this is guitar number 1 that was built in Northampton, Massachusetts. It's made out of Hawaiian koa. And it's bound in flamed maple. The back strip in this particular instrument is abalone inlay. I think you played this guitar, didn't you?
That may have been the one that you brought into.
No, I think it was. Yeah. I think it was. The neck is made out of Honduran mahogany. The neck is not bound on this instrument. The neck is not bound. I didn't have the skill set nor the time to learn to bind instrument necks. I did later on my other instrument. I think is bound, but all other processes are the same. I had to start with a fretboard, just a piece of ebony, thicknessed to the appropriate thickness, and then slotted to the appropriate scale length. Scale length is critically important. This happens to be a standard 25.4 scale length. So the slots, and then once that's put down on the neck, we can go ahead and cut the frets and install them. So this instrument is what's called a 12 fret triple O. Triple O is a nomenclature that Martin uses. Martin pretty much invented the animal. And they had 0, 00, 000, OM, and dreadnoughts. And then later they came up with a couple other shapes. I only see a partial picture, so I don't know what you're seeing here, Bill. But basically,
the whole guitar right there.
You're seeing the whole thing? Okay, great. Yeah, this is finished in nitrocellulose lacquer. Again, I did not have the skill set to finish guitars on my first guitar. So I brought it home and played it for about a month. And then I shipped it back from California to Northampton, Massachusetts, where Bill Cumpiano finished it for me and then sent it home.
Sweet. Getting another question here, Randy. How wide is the neck on that guitar?
How wide is it?
How wide is it? Yes.
Well, in terms of thickness, I can tell you the nut is 1 3/4 inches, which is kind of a standard now, a standard width. 20 years ago, 1 11/16 was considered to be a nut width that most players were comfortable with, but I wanted a fingerstyle instrument. This was designed specifically for me so that I could play altered tunings in fingerstyle. And so it's got a 1 3/4 inch neck at the nut. And down here, I think I'm at 2 1/4 inches on the spread, on the saddle.
Wonderful. You know, Randy, this I could sit here and listen to this all day long. We are now coming up on about 50 minutes.
Wow.
I think it would be wonderful if maybe you could just play us out, play a little bit on whichever guitar you want to play.
Sure.
And thank you so very much for taking your time. Viewers, we hope this was as informative for you as it certainly was for me. Randy, thank you so much.
Well, you're welcome, Bill. And thank you guys for whoever's out there. Thank you for listening. Are we done?
That's beautiful, man.
All right, thanks for joining us. I hope everybody had a great time. Great questions from the audience today.
Thank you.
Sorry for the difficulties in getting started. I learned a lot today about technology and how to solve these issues more quickly than in a half an hour. But
DJ, it's a learning experience. Good for you, man. See, you don't have to be at work to learn these things.
I enjoyed your presentation. This is the second time I've seen you talk about Luthier from the independent Luthier standpoint, and it was fantastic. I hope everybody learned a lot today. Mr. Bill and Dave at the Museum of Making Music have helped put together another week of Mom at Home. So we'll be kicking that off on Monday. Every day we're going to have something. We'll be posting that information to our website, museumofmakingmusic.org. So you'll find that. And then we'll also be sending out an email to everybody who's subscribed on our mailing list. You can sign up there at the museumofmakingmusic.org. But thanks, guys. Big applause for Randy.
Great job. One more thing, if anybody's been inspired to want to come into the museum once we're back up and running and pick up a guitar, please do. We have a nice little Martin in the interactive area. We've got a Fender Telecaster, Fender Stratocaster, Fender bass. A lot of hands-on opportunities there. So Randy, I think you've probably inspired people to want to come in and just.
I hope so.
All right.
It's the second happiest place on earth.
All right. I'll see you guys later. Have a great weekend.
Bye, guys. Stay safe.